It was a bright and sunny day in Ponyville, and Lyra was about to start the first day of 4th grade, surrounded by her peers from other classes from previous years. She and a few other of her classmates had recently obtained their cutie marks. Lyra didn't tend to talk to many of the other students, but they also seemed to avoid her due to her attitude and antisocial behaviour. As of this, an empty desk always sat next to Lyra in the middle of the classroom. She stared at the empty teacher's desk, slouched over and resting on a hoof, waiting for the teacher to hurry up so that the day could progress and she could go home. Meanwhile, a small cream-coloured filly with a straight, deep blue mane and pink highlights was being dropped off by her mother to her new school. She was a little scared and upset and was clutching her mother's foreleg. "Please don't make me move schools, Mum. I'll be a good girl. Promise, please just let me go back," Bonbon begged with her mother. "You haven't been a bad girl, Bonbon. We simply can't afford to keep you at the school in Canterlot, unless, of course, you want to live in a run-down home," Bonbon Mothers replied. "No, Mum, but it's just... all my friends are there," Bonbon whimpered, brushing her eyes to wipe away the light tears. "I'm sorry, dear. If there was something I could do, I'd do it. But I can't. Besides, we can still visit your friends in Canterlot occasionally. I'm sure you'll make lots of new friends here anyway," Bonbon's mother said, brushing her daughter's mane with her hoof to comfort her. "I guess," Bonbon admitted sheepishly. Bonbon and her mother slowly approached the door to her classroom she'd been assigned to. "Now, don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure you'll have a great day. I'll see you this afternoon, okay?" Bonbon's mother said, rustling her hair. However, before she was about to leave, a stallion was suddenly trotting hurriedly towards the classroom they were standing out from, down the hall. "Oh, hello there," he said as he approached the pair. "You must be the new student, and... her mother." "Yes, her name is Bonbon," Bonbon's mother said, looking at her daughter, who only shyly hid behind her and smiled weakly. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I have to go. I'll see you this afternoon, okay? I love you so much," she said, kissing her daughter's head before turning around to the stallion. "You must be her new teacher. I'm sorry, but I have to run. But I'm sure we can become better acquainted later," she said. "Not a problem at all. I look forward to it," the teacher said. "Great. See you later, sweetie," she said to Bonbon again, who only nodded shyly to respond. With that, Bonbon's mother left. "Welcome to the new school, Bonbon. I hope you find your time here to be enjoyable and informative," the teacher said to Bonbon, who smiled. "Thank you, sir," Bonbon said appreciatively. "Oh, my name's Mr. Mendel. You and your mother are quite a formal pair," the teacher complimented on Bonbon's social etiquette. "We're from Canterlot. I was just raised to talk to people like that," Bonbon said. "Well, that sort of attitude will get you places here. Shall we go inside?" Mr. Mendel asked. Bonbon looked at the door and nodded enthusiastically. Lyra saw the door creaking open out of the corner of her eye, as she drew a small groove into the desk with her pencil. "Finally," she said, suddenly wondering if she should have wanted him to take longer, if she wanted less class, but to her surprise, a new cream-coloured filly walked in instead. "Ugh, new kid," Lyra mumbled before seeing the teacher walk through the door after her. "Finally, let's get this day over with." "Good morning, class," Mr. Mendel greeted his students. "Most of you should know me. I'm Mr. Mendel. This is Bonbon. She's new here, so please make her feel welcome," he said before turning to Bonbon. "Why don't you find a seat somewhere and we'll begin?" the teacher said. Bonbon nodded and looked around the classroom. There were a few empty desks, but one spare seat next to a particular aqua-coloured unicorn filly stood out to her. She happily trotted over to it, eager to see if she could befriend the aqua filly. Lyra, however, noticed instantly that she was coming towards her and started to panic. She panicked because she wasn't an antisocial shut-in, but because she was just socially awkward among other fillies. She couldn't stand to be around most colts. They were usually all obnoxious and loud or bullies. But she couldn't be around many fillies either because of her sexuality. It was confusing to her at times, but she only ever seemed to be attracted to other fillies rather than colts. But none of the fillies at her school seemed to appeal to her. She had always kept this on the down low, though, for fear of public humiliation. Hence why she avoided socializing with others. Lyra didn't have much time to think about what she was going to say if Bonbon sat next to her and introduced herself. But it was too late, regardless, because the filly had already plopped her things beside her new desk and sat down. Bonbon looked over to Lyra, who seemed to be looking in the other direction, as if she was trying to avoid direct eye contact. "Hey there, I'm Bonbon," she whispered to the aqua unicorn. Lyra grit her teeth, trying to think. "Oh, I knew she'd do this. All right, play it cool. Don't be rude. Just say hi, then mind your own business." "Hey," she said, looking back at Bonbon. It wasn't until she stared directly back at her that she noticed how much of a sight she really was. She stared right at her, deep into her cyan eyes, as if she had seen something amazing happen in them. It was the first time she'd ever actually seen beauty in something so simple as another pony's eyes. "Hello?" "Hello?" Bonbon whispered, waving a hoof in front of Lyra's face. Lyra suddenly snapped out of her trance-like state and realised she'd been staring with her mouth agape the whole time. "What's your name?" Bonbon asked quietly. Lyra Heartstrings," Lyra replied without thinking. "What are you doing?" "She'll probably want to hang out now," Lyra thought to herself, wanting to smack herself over the head, hoping no pony had seen her little hypnotised state. Just then she slumped into her chair. "How would you like to be friends, Lyra?" Bonbon asked, eager to make her first friend at school. Lyra only bore a look of concern. She stayed away from other fillies to avoid getting close to them, just as a precaution, but she was by no means rude, a rude filly. She worked up a false smile and gave a weak, fake chuckle. Okay then," she said, scratching the back of her neck with the tip of her hoof. Bonbon smiled and shook a little, with a successful attempt at making a new friend. "Can we hang out later?" Bonbon asked. Lyra only became more concerned. She'd become entranced by her gaze before. But if they started hanging out, then what else might happen? Sure, I guess," Lyra whispered back. I could just go sit in my normal spot. She won't find me there." Bonbon was feeling much better about the day already. She had already made a new friend who had agreed to hang out with her. Her happy mood was momentarily interrupted by Mr. Mendel, who called her name. "Bonbon, are you listening?" he asked, noticing the filly was distracted. Lyra considered it a blessing that the teacher had broken Bonbon's chain of thought. "Yes, sir," she said, sitting up. Mr. Mendel only smiled, able to forgive her attention span for the time being. Bonbon felt a little guilty that she hadn't been listening for the last 10 minutes, but Lyra considered Bonbon interrupting her to be a bonus. Before he could continue talking, though, a bell rang, echoing throughout the whole school. "Ah, right. Some of you have special classes to attend." Mr. Mendel pulled out a small corkboard with a chart on it. "Cheerily, you have drama and acting," he said, signalling to the small purple filly that she was allowed to leave. She grabbed her things and trotted happily out the door. "Rarity, you have art and design," she said, looking at the white-purple mane unicorn in the front row, who followed in the previous footsteps. "Junebug, you have a gardening class," he said, as continued going through the names. When there were about 10 of the 18 students left, Mr. Mendel had almost finished his list. "Bonbon, cooking class," he said, nodding to the little filly. She remembered her mother had signed her up for the cooking class and retrieved her bags. Before she left, she turned to Lyra. "See you later," she said before carrying her bags towards the exit. Lyra trailed her body all the way to the door, unable to take her eyes off her. She watched the particular way in which her flank smoothly moved with each leg movement. As soon as the door shut behind her, though, she snapped out of yet another trance. "What's wrong with me?" she said to herself, not realising she said it out aloud. Every pony looked at her confused, and she hung her head in embarrassment. Outside, Bonbon did a light-hearted giddy dance, happy that in just 10 minutes she had already made a new friend. She looked at the sheet in her bag and looked at the number of her next class before making her way to it. Upon reaching her class, she noticed a few other ponies were also taking the cooking course, and she was about to try and make another friend. Before she realised it, they were all at separate benches. Realising this must have been a requirement, Bonbon made her way to one of the available desks and surveyed some of the other students. There was an orange filly with a ponytail mane style, a blue pony with a similar coloured mane. But before she could look around much more, a voice rang through the room. A light brown Pegasus mare with a curly red mane and large blue glasses had made her way into the room, and the students were quick to realise she would be their teacher and snapped to attention. "Good morning, every pony. Welcome to my class. I'm Mrs. Swirl," the teacher announced to her eager students. "That's an odd name," Lyra thought to herself before the teacher started talking. "Now, I know you all had Mrs. Cake teaching you last year, but she's very busy organising the plans for her sweet shop, so I will be filling in for her for the first semester. So, let's get started with the roll call," Mrs. Swirl announced. As the teacher continued to talk, Bonbon noticed around the classroom that every pony else had their cutie marks, and she looked back at her own flank, bare and cream-coloured, and threw a light frown. But the teacher noticed her face and called out her name on roll. "Bonbon?" she called. Bonbon snapped up to attention. Yes, here," she replied. "What's the matter, dear?" Mrs. Swirl asked. "Oh, it's nothing," Bonbon replied, not wanting to bring attention to herself. "If you say so, dear." "That's the roll call, then, and every pony is present. What a funny coincidence that your name is Bonbon. That's exactly the type of delectable treats we will be making in class today." "Mrs. I thought you said we were making apple pies today," the orange filly across the room asked with a country-like accent. "No, we will be doing apple baking class in 2 weeks," Mrs. Swirl replied, before pulling out a cookbook. "Now everyone, will find their cookbooks, ingredients and equipment under their benches. I took the liberty of checking a lot of your grades from last year, and you all seem to have done an outstanding job. Those of you who are new to class or have any trouble, please inform me, and I will be more than obliged to help you. In the meantime, we'll make a game out of it. Anyone who can beat me in making their first batch can have the rest of the day off," Mrs. Swirl said, quite confident that no one would best her at time as a teacher. Bonbon looked under her bench and found the ingredients appropriate for making vanilla-filled bonbons. She pulled up each ingredient, placing it on the bench purposefully, leaving the cookbook under the bench, recognising each ingredient. What the teacher didn't know was that Bonbon had quite a knack for making these little treats very well. While every pony else was still getting out their supplies and reading through the recipe, she began to create her delicacies. "Mrs, are you sure this isn't a bit too advanced?" a brown unicorn colt from across the room asked. "Possibly, but this is advanced cooking, is it not?" the teacher rhetorically asked the student, giving a light-hearted giggle. I suppose," the colt replied, and with that the class got into the lesson. It was about 45 minutes before Bonbon had just about finished her first batch, before a voice rang out across the room. "Finished!" Bonbon frowned and turned around to see the other side of the room a grey Pegasus filly with oddly positioned eyes. "But I was so close," Bonbon said, wondering if she really did have a talent for the treats at all. But then she noticed that the filly's oven was on. "Bonbons aren't made in the oven," Bonbon thought as the teacher trotted over to the bench. Then she could hardly resist a giggle when she saw the grey filly pull out a tray of muffins. "Oh, my Derpy. We weren't making muffins today, dear. I don't even think we had the right ingredients for muffins," Mrs. Swirl said as Derpy placed the tray down. "We weren't?" Derpy said, looking up confused. She too had left her recipes under the bench and instead decided to bake her favourite confection. Mrs. Swirl, not wanting to make Derpy feel upset, picked up a muffin from the tray in her mouth and tasted it. It was a warm, sweet, soft delight, and it went down very smoothly and tasted wonderful. "Well, I have to commend you for these, Derpy. They are really good. I'm not quite sure how you pulled them off, but they are very, very good," Mrs. Swirl said with a half mouthful of delicious muffin. bringing a smile to Derpy's face. Just as Mrs. Swell was about to move back to her personal bench, Bonbon called out to her. "Finished," she announced, and Mrs. Swell walked over grinning and saw a tray covered in delectable-looking chocolate treats. "These look wonderful, Bonbon, and you completed them so fast," Mrs. Swell said, leaning over the tray. "Thank you, Miss Swell," Bonbon said gratefully, as the teacher popped one in her mouth. The chocolate tasted perfect and melted smoothly in the heat change in her mouth, and as the vanilla centre oozed out. "These are wonderful, Bonbon. Obviously, these treats must be a speciality of yours," Mrs. Swell said. "Oh, I just make them a lot, I guess," Bonbon said, blushing. "Well, that would explain your cutie mark then," Mrs. Swell said. "Cutie mark?" Bonbon thought. "I don't have a cutie mark," Bonbon said, looking confusedly at her flank, and gasping in shock to find that her cream-coloured flank now bore 3 wrapped candies. "Oh my gosh, my cutie mark! Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh!" Bonbon gleefully rejoiced, bouncing around before realising every pony was watching her, and she blushed a little and made a soft squeak before turning back to the teacher. "So, does that mean I get the rest of the day off?" Bonbon asked. "Deal's a deal. Lunch is in 15 minutes, so if you don't have anyone to take you home, you're welcome to stay in the spare classroom down the hall during mid-breaks," Mrs. Swell said. "Wow, I didn't know teachers were allowed to offer that privilege," Bonbon said. "It only happens very rarely, so make the most of free time, okay?" Mrs. Swell said before turning around. Bonbon hopped over to her bags and grabbed them before heading towards the door. Mrs. Swell smiled as she bounced out, before noticing Derpy's expression wasn't as happy as when she praised her muffins. Derpy stared rather blankly at the delicacies before Mrs. Swell spoke up. "You too, Derpy. You did an excellent job today." Derpy let out a proud booming smile, picking up 2 of the muffins and her bag before flying out the door. "Hey, wait up!" Bonbon heard behind her, and she turned around to see the grey Pegasus filly flying over towards her. "Oh, hey, you're Derpy, right?" Bonbon asked. Derpy stopped flying and landed rather abruptly next to her. "Yeah, you're Bonbon, right?" Derpy asked. "Yeah, it's nice to meet you." "You're new here, aren't you?" Derpy said, not having recognised her before. "Yeah, my mother moved me here from Canterlot," Bonbon said. "Oh well, that's a little while away. Do you have many friends yet?" Derpy asked. "Just one so far," Bonbon replied. "Would you like 2? Derpy asked, holding up a muffin to her. "Sure," Bonbon giggled, laughing as she took the soft, sweet delight. "Cool, I've got a few things to do, but do you want to hang out after lunch in the spare classroom? I don't have anyone coming to pick me up either. I mean, I could fly, but my mummy thinks it's safer for me not to fly home alone during the day," Derpy said. "Why's that?" "There's not really much reason to worry about anything," Bonbon said, amused. "Oh, I'm just not that great a flyer yet," Derpy explained, looking at her wings and flicking them up lightly. "Oh, okay. So I guess I'll see you after lunch?" Bonbon asked. "Looking forward to it. Or in my case, forward and left," Derpy said, cracking a joke on her eyes. "Oh, there's no need to make fun of yourself." "How did that happen anyway?" Bonbon asked, curious as to why may have caused Derpy's eyes to look in different directions. "Oh, it's all good fun. I really don't mind. People pick on it all the time, but I am who I am. It's a long story anyway. I might tell you after break, okay?" Derpy said, getting ready to leave. "Sure. See you later," Bonbon said before Derpy flapped her wings and flew slowly down the hall. She felt slightly bad because of how she misjudged Derpy before she talked to her. She thought originally she was just a silly pony with an eye deformity, but she was actually a friendly, rather smart and comical pony, and it only took 5 minutes for them to become friends. With a huge boost of enthusiasm, Bonbon gleefully trotted down the halls awaiting the break.